No one marries a fat girl, sir, but I can cook. Her voice was small, careful, like she had said those words too many times before and already knew how they would be received. Clara Whitmore stood in the doorway of the ranch house, her hands tightly clasped in front of her eyes lowered just enough to avoid direct rejection, but not enough to hide the fear in them. The man standing across from her didn't answer right away. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his presence filling the room without effort. His name was Thomas Hale, and the land he owned stretched farther than most people could ride in a day. He had sent for a wife, not out of romance, but out of necessity. The ranch needed someone to help keep it running, and he needed someone to fill the silence that had followed him for too many years. Clara shifted slightly under his silence, her fingers tightening. "I understand if you don't want," she began softly, but he cut her off, not harshly, just directly. "I didn't ask for someone perfect," Thomas said. His voice was deep, steady. "I asked for someone willing to stay." Clara blinked, caught off guard. She looked up for the first time, really looking at him. His expression wasn't mocking, it wasn't disappointed, it was honest. "You came all this way," he added. "That tells me enough." The words landed differently than she expected. Not pity, not rejection. Something else, something she didn't quite recognize yet. She swallowed. "I can cook," she repeated quietly, as if it was the only thing she could offer. Thomas gave a small nod. "Then we'll eat well," he said simply. And just like that, everything changed. The first few days were quiet. Clara moved through the house carefully, as if afraid to disturb something fragile. She cooked, she cleaned, she kept to herself. She expected criticism, sharp looks, disappointed sighs, the kind of small cruelty she had grown used to. But it never came. Thomas ate every meal she prepared without complaint. He didn't praise much, but he always finished his plate. And sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught the smallest hint of approval in his expression. That was enough to keep her going. One morning she woke early and found him already outside, repairing a section of fence. She hesitated in the doorway, watching the way he worked, steady, patient, never rushed. He didn't seem like the kind of man who would judge quickly or speak without meaning. She stepped outside. "Do you need help?" she asked. He glanced up, surprised, then shook his head. "I've got it." Clara nodded, about to turn back inside when he added, "But you can keep me company if you want." The words were simple, but they stayed with her. She didn't go back inside. She stood there quietly watching him work, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was in the way. Days turned into a rhythm. Clara found comfort in small routines, kneading dough, stirring soups, setting the table before he came in from the fields. Thomas found himself noticing things he hadn't before: the warmth of the house, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of someone moving around in the next room. It wasn't loud, it wasn't overwhelming, but it filled the silence in a way he hadn't realized he needed. One evening, as they sat across from each other at the table, Clara spoke without thinking. "You don't have to pretend," she said quietly. Thomas looked up. "Pretend what?" She hesitated, then forced the words out. "That you're satisfied. You could have had someone better." The room went still for a moment. Thomas set his fork down carefully. "Better how?" he asked. Clara looked down at her hands. "Smaller, pretty, someone people don't laugh at." Thomas studied her for a long second before speaking. "People laugh at a lot of things," he said. "Doesn't make them right." She didn't respond. He leaned back slightly. "You keep this place running, you work hard, you don't complain, and you think that's not enough?" Clara's throat tightened. She didn't know how to answer that. No one had ever said it like that before. Thomas picked up his fork again. "Seems like more than enough to me." The words settled deep inside her, quiet, steady, undeniable. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe. Maybe she wasn't lacking. Maybe she had just never been seen properly. The change didn't happen overnight. Clara still hesitated, still second-guessed. But slowly, the way she carried herself began to shift. She stood a little straighter. She spoke a little more. She laughed once, soft and surprised, as if she hadn't expected the sound to come from her at all. Thomas noticed. He didn't point it out, but he noticed. Then one afternoon, a group of riders passed by the ranch. They slowed when they saw Clara outside, hanging laundry. One of them laughed, not loudly but enough. She froze. The old feeling came rushing back, sharp, familiar, suffocating. She turned away quickly, her hands trembling slightly. But before she could retreat inside, Thomas stepped out onto the porch. His voice carried across the yard, calm but firm. "Keep riding." The men hesitated, then one of them smirked. Didn't mean anything by it. Thomas didn't move. Didn't ask. Something in his tone made it clear this wasn't a suggestion. The riders exchanged glances, then moved on without another word. Clara stood still for a moment, then slowly turned back toward him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He met her gaze. "Yeah," he replied quietly. "I did." She looked at him, really looked this time, not just at the man who had taken her in, but at the man who had chosen, again and again, to stand beside her without making it feel like a favor. And in that moment, something inside her shifted completely. Not because she had changed, but because for the first time, someone had shown her she didn't need to. And that realization was about to change everything. The next morning, Clara woke before sunrise, the faint light slipping through the window and resting softly across the wooden floor. For a moment, she lay still, listening, not for judgment, not for whispers, but for the quiet rhythm of a place that had begun to feel like her own. She sat up slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and something felt different. Not outside. The ranch was the same. The wind still moved across the fields. The boards still creaked with age. But inside her, something had shifted. She stood, dressed, and stepped into the kitchen. She didn't hesitate this time. She didn't move like a guest. She moved like someone who belonged. When Thomas entered a short while later, he paused just slightly. The table was already set. The smell of fresh bread filled the room. Clara turned toward him, not with uncertainty, but with a small, steady confidence. "Breakfast is ready," she said. He nodded, but his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than usual. He noticed the difference. He didn't say it, but he noticed. As the days passed, that quiet change grew. Clara began stepping outside more often, not just when necessary, but because she wanted to. She walked the edges of the ranch. She watched the way the land moved with the wind. She even asked questions about the animals, the fences, the work that had once felt far beyond her. Thomas answered every one of them, simply and patiently. He never made her feel foolish for asking, and she never stopped asking. One afternoon, as they worked side by side stacking wood, Clara laughed again, this time without surprise, without hesitation. The sound carried across the yard, light and real. Thomas glanced at her, something warm flickering briefly in his expression. "You're getting used to this place," he said. She nodded, brushing her hands together. "I think I am." There was a pause. Then she added quietly, "I think I'm getting used to myself too." Thomas didn't respond right away, but the way he looked at her said enough. Time moved forward. The ranch didn't feel empty anymore. It felt lived in, shared. And for Clara, it felt safe. Until the setting more now, when we know this kitchen by the world, the ranch didn't feel her good before. It felt safe, and she said for them. Thomas moved a veal, but the word she said, as they worked for her. Thomas didn't feel empty anymore. It felt safe. And for Clara Wortlet looking him, it felt lived in. Thomas didn't feel empty anymore, but the way he looked at her said no. They made themselves black locals for light, but the way he looked at her said no, but for them feel when we know this kitchen by the world. Thomas didn't feel empty anymore, but the way he looked at her said, the ranch didn't feel it felt safe. Until one day the past tried to follow her back. A wagon rolled up near the edge of the property. She saw it first, recognized the shape, the worn wood, the driver sitting stiffly at the front. Her chest tightened instantly. "Thomas," she said quietly. He followed her gaze. His expression didn't change, but his posture did. He stepped forward slightly, placing himself just a half step ahead of her. The wagon stopped. A man climbed down, well-dressed, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who measured people before speaking. "Clara Whitmore," he called out. "There you are." She didn't move. The old fear tried to rise again, but it didn't take hold the way it used to. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady. He glanced at Thomas briefly, then back at her. "I've come to correct a mistake," he said. "You were never meant to stay out here." Thomas spoke before Clara could respond. "She's exactly where she's meant to be." The man's gaze sharpened. "This doesn't concern you." Thomas didn't raise his voice. "It does now." The silence stretched. Clara stepped forward this time, not behind Thomas but beside him. "I'm not going back," she said clearly. The man frowned slightly. "You don't understand what you're giving up." Clara shook her head. "No," she replied softly. "I finally understand what I have." The words surprised even her, but they felt right, her for a long moment, as if trying to find the uncertainty he expected. But it wasn't there. Not anymore. Finally, he let out a quiet breath. "Then you've made your choice," he said. She nodded. "I have." He didn't argue further. He simply turned, climbed back onto the wagon, and drove away without another word. The dust settled slowly. Clara stood still for a moment, then exhaled, a long breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Thomas glanced at her. "You all right?" She smiled, not nervously, not uncertainly, but with quiet strength. "I am." There was a pause. Then she added softer, "Thank you." He shook his head slightly. "You didn't need me to say anything," he said. "You already knew." She looked at him, understanding settling deeper than before. He was right. He hadn't given her confidence. He had simply shown her it was already there. As the sun dipped low across the ranch, painting everything in warm gold, Clara stood beside him, not as someone who had been chosen out of necessity, but as someone who had chosen to stay. And this time it wasn't fear that kept her there. It was something stronger, something real. And for the first time in her life, she didn't measure her worth by how others saw her. She saw it for herself. And that made all the difference.